So welcome to this session on the Learning Consortium for the Creative Economy. I'm Steve Denning, and I've been leading this initiative, which is a group of companies that are exploring the questions that we've been discussing the last couple of days about what are the organizations, what are the practices that are needed to survive and thrive in this very different economy that's emerged. What we've called the creative economy, a Fortune called it recently the new industrial revolution. And the summary of the findings of this consortium are available in this blue document, which is at the desk or on your seat. And it has a link to the file of the full report, which is a comprehensive report, 37 pages long. And it looks at 9 companies from 45 different dimensions. And so you'll find all of the details about what I'm talking in that full report. And when I announced this last November at this meeting, a number of smart people told me, well, this will take you years. It will take you a year to form a group. It will take you a year to figure out what you're trying to accomplish. It would take you another year to do the site visits, and then it would take you another year to figure out what you've learned. Well, we like to think of ourselves as Agile, and it's all been completed in 1 year. And as it turned out, we didn't know who would accept our invitation, but 11 firms joined us, including some famous firms like Microsoft and Ericsson and Magna. And we had 9 site visits throughout the year. And they weren't all in Silicon Valley. There were a couple there, but there were a couple in the Midwest in the US and a couple in Europe, and also a virtual site visit to India. And what we saw in these site visits was that there is a convergence to a set of management practices that are very much more appropriate to the kind of world that we are living in. And they are under different labels, and they come from different sectors. There is this convergence on a set of practices that actually work. And the account that I'm going to be giving you today, and members of the panel from the members of the Learning Consortium, this is not about what some of the speakers have been talking about here, about what will be happening or what things that ought to be happening. This is about things that are actually happening right now in organizations, big, small, all around the world. So this is in the spirit of Peter Drucker, that the future is already here. We don't have to wait for the future. If we look carefully out the window, we can see the future is already here. And let me start, however, with a few things that we didn't see, things that we might have expected to see, given what we heard in this conference, but things that we didn't see. So we didn't see, for instance, large numbers of managers being replaced by machines. This is not something we saw. In fact, what we saw were managers and workers being enabled by machines. The managers and workers could do amazing things that they couldn't do 10 or 15 years ago as a result of these machines. 10, 15, 20 years ago, they were like paddling canoes. Now they're driving speedboats. It's not that they were replaced. They're simply doing different things, very different things, and being much more productive in doing it. We also checked in at the World Chess Championships and looked for how Big Blue is doing. And we actually couldn't find Big Blue in the World Chess Championship. It seems like it's all humans in the World Chess Championship. So we asked IBM why was this, and they said, well, it wasn't productive for them. It was too expensive to keep Big Blue running the chess competition, so they pulled out of the chess competition. And we also looked at the television program Jeopardy, to which you listened to some of the speakers we heard yesterday. One would expect that because the best contestant in Jeopardy is Watson, that in fact Jeopardy would now be a contest between computers. But we actually saw it, and there were human beings, strangely. There were no computers competing in Jeopardy. And again, we asked IBM, why is that? And they said, well, it was too expensive for the returns that they were getting to compete on Jeopardy. So in fact, human beings seem to be triumphant in those two areas. So that we didn't see those things that we would have expected, given what we heard yesterday. And we heard some of the speakers saying that the future of management is projects, project management. That's how organizations will be run. But that is really the opposite of what we heard. Project is an idea that you define a goal, you form a team to implement that goal, and they do it for a couple of years. Then they throw the project over the fence and hope that the client likes it. But as we heard from the presentation this morning, we spend a couple of $1 billion on a project to renovate the banks, and you find that the customers actually aren't interested in that. They never even go to the banks. So we wasted a couple of $1 billion on something. So project is the opposite of what we did not find any PIM books around in these organizations. In fact, what we found were that project managers were asking us, how do we become agile? How do we become much more able to deal with these rapid changes in the marketplace? So quite the opposite. It's not project management. It's the opposite of project management. And we heard that managers are doing a lot more monitoring of their employees so that they know exactly what the employees are doing at every moment. That was the opposite of what we found in these organizations. In fact, these organizations are deliberately creating autonomy because they know that if they monitor everything the employees are doing, they will get routine drudgery. They will not get creative performance. They know that they have to stand back and give the employees real autonomy, not just fake autonomy. And we also saw that, had a discussion on innovation, that the question was, where is the innovation in the agenda of the meetings? Is it item number 4 or is it item number 15? That question doesn't arise in these organizations because the agenda is innovation. The whole agenda, items 1 to 15, it's all about how do we create more value, how do we innovate in these organizations. And I guess you would say there'd been a lot of skepticism in the last day or two about, is it possible? Can these big old dinosaurs possibly transform themselves? I guess skepticism about whether it was realistic. Well, we don't have to imagine or ask that because it's already happening. In fact, we see some of these very big organizations are in fact in rapid transformation and have been so for quite some years. So these are the things that we didn't see in the organization. What we did see in these organizations is really a different, they are different goals, they're different structure of work, different way of coordinating work, different values, different ways of communicating. In terms of the goal, the total focus of the organization is in delivering value to the customer. Continuous innovation, delighting the customer becomes the overriding goal of the organization. Everybody in the organization with a clear line of sight so that they can see how their work is delivering value to the customer. And to make that happen, you have these other 4 things that need to happen. You have to have not individuals reporting to bosses, but autonomous teams, self-organizing teams, structured autonomous teams, working in short cycles that are continuously delivering value to the customers with different values. Instead of efficiency and predictability driving things, it's transparency, total radical transparency, trust within the organization, and continuous improvement, and communications. Instead of top-down telling people what to do, it's about horizontal interactions, conversations. Mr. Chang talked about zero distance to customers. This is about zero distance to employees as well, where you have CIOs, Chief Financial Officer, Chief Information Officer sitting at the same mobile desk as the most junior employee, side by side in a team room. That is the kind of interaction. Anybody can talk to anybody in these organizations. And perhaps 2 surprising things that came out of this, because those things are not all that surprising. They've been written about in terms of Agile and Scrum and DevOps and continuous deployment and design thinking or design doing, as we heard yesterday, or super VUCA, all sorts of different labels. Those practices are quite common, but these two findings are really unexpected, that mindsets are more important than technology, more important than methodologies. In firms that had this mindset that I've just talked about, the benefits happened. If you didn't have that mindset, even if you had all of the practices I described, it didn't work. It's mindsets that are actually driving the change. And secondly, these are not bossless offices. This is not chaos. This is not employees just running wild. Strong inspirational leadership is key driver. All of these organizations, we saw strong inspirational leadership as a fundamental requirement. And one of our visits was to Microsoft, and when we heard that Microsoft wanted to join us, we said, yes, come on in, but we were wondering what we were going to see. And to some extent, we had this image of Microsoft as a big warship, which was slow and not very agile and not very customer friendly. But when we actually got to Microsoft, we found it was very, very different. It was a set of speedboats being orchestrated in a very coordinated fashion, very agile, being able to change direction and continuous communication and interaction between those speedboats and the orchestration. And the host of our visit was someone called Aaron Bork, who's in the developer division, about 4,000 people, and they have hundreds of teams, 10 to 12 people, and they are working in 3-week sprints and have been doing so for the last 5 years. And when in our visit, we were in fact in week 1 of Sprint 87. So for 5 years, they have been methodically, with these speedboats, racing ahead to create new value for customers, 3 weeks on and on and on. And Aaron couldn't join us. He is busy orchestrating these speedboats. But he did actually give us a video.
Today, a market opportunity comes and goes very, very quickly. We buy software with a touch of a finger on our phones, on our mobile devices, from our computers. And we do that every day. When I look back to software 10 years ago, you could spend a year planning, spend a year coding, and then spend a year delivering.
Those days are gone, okay? Today the world is, hey, I've got an idea. I want to think about how fast I can translate that idea into reality and get it to my customer's hands, then understand what my customer's experience is, what my customer is doing with that, and take that knowledge and learning and make my application or my service better.
And there's a new market demand, and there's a new competitor, and there's a new business, and there's new opportunity, and we have to go take advantage of those things. And so, as a business, if you don't adapt to that, you're just going to die a slow, painful, ugly death.
It's a huge shift, and it's a huge shift for everybody.
What you really want to do is think about providing the level of agility that each team needs to have to be able to do what they need to do, but also know that they all are going to accrue value to one service or one application at the end of the day.
It's about how you manage change. Changing the culture for a small team of 10 or 15 or even 20, 30 people is one thing. Changing the culture for 500, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people is a much bigger deal.
Organizations and companies that can adapt very quickly to changes in the business landscape, in the customer landscape, the technology landscape, are always going to be in a position to immediately adjust and deliver something new. And the company who's on a long-range 2- and 3-year plan will have missed it.
What's driving Microsoft to get into this mode is necessity, commercial necessity. If they do not become agile, they will die. That is simple. It's a commercially driven thing. Now, but when you look at it, it also happens to be better for the employees. We had many off-script conversations with characters like these, and we asked them, how do you like this way of working? And if you were ever told to go back to the bureaucratic way of working, what would be the answer? It was no way. This is the only way to do work, the only sensible way. If Microsoft changes, we're out of here. We're going to go to somewhere that works in this more sensible way. So it's not just better for the firm, it's better for the employees, and because it's focused on delivering value for customers, it's actually better for customers. So in one sense, what's there not to like about this different way of organizing? And in fact, the workplaces are strikingly different. I mean, is this a nightclub, or this happens to be Microsoft? Quite unlike any office that I ever worked in the World Bank. They are congenial, they are convivial, they are comfortable spaces, they are team rooms, they are, you can have a private place, you can have a public space. It encourages collaboration. You feel like collaborating, you feel young. And it's striking. When you see senior executives sitting together with junior executives, you suddenly realize this is zero distance. This is, we're all in this together to make this different kind of organization happen. And last year when I announced this, some of the very bright people here said, well, that's very interesting, Steve, but these practices, Agile, is not serious. These are only for software and only for small organizations, little startups. They can't handle big, complex operations, and they're not reliable, and in any event, it doesn't last. So when these firms grow up, they will learn that they need to become hierarchical and bureaucratic. So we specifically looked into these things in the course of these site visits, and in fact, we found that none of those things were true. That in fact, this is spreading to everything in the organization. It scales much better, in fact, than bureaucracy. It handles complexity, as you'll hear in a moment. It handles fail-safe operations, and some of these organizations have been doing it for 10 or 15 years. So it's fragile, but it is durable when you have the right mindset. And this is a different way of thinking about the world. It's not about computers, but about communicating. It's not about building cars, it's about transportation. It's not about banks, it's about banking. It's not about hotels, it's about accommodation. As we heard from Rachel, it's about not about hospitals, but about health. This is about looking at the world through the eyes of the customer and saying, how can we make the life of the customer better? Very different view of the world. And the top-down way is giving way not to an inverted pyramid or bottom-up. It's outside in. It's continuous interaction between the managers and the people doing the work and the customers, the people for whom the work is being done. And if anyone is a boss in this arrangement, it's the customers. The customer is driving the success of the business. And we would think that this is actually a rather large change. I've likened it to a Copernican revolution of the kind that existed in astronomy. In 1500, people thought that the sun revolved around the Earth until Copernicus came along and pointed out, well, it's not exactly that way. The Earth is one of a number of planets orbiting around the sun. And that was not just a discovery in astronomy. It changed the way people thought about the universe. It meant that the place of churches, religion in life, the place of the Roman Catholic Church, and the place of kings and queens who considered themselves ruling by divine right, that all became open to discussion. And over time, one saw that huge social changes occurred because of this different way of looking at the universe. And I believe that we're facing a similar kind of fundamental revisiting of the shape of the business universe, where in the 20th century, firms used to regard themselves as the solid center of the universe, and customers revolving around them, if they were in the picture at all. That is now changed to a world in which the customer is the center of the universe, and these firms are revolving around the customer, trying to find ways in which they could delight and add value to the customer. It's a fundamentally different way, and it will have the same kind of reverberations, social reverberations over time as people start to ask themselves, well, if it's the workers who are actually contributing all the value to the customer, why is there such a discrepancy between the chief executive officer and the workers? Why is the chief executive officer pay increasing so much, and why is the pay of the people who are contributing value, why is that stagnating? Those kinds of questions will become possible to ask once you start to realize that there's a different way of looking at the universe. And so Richard Straub challenged the speakers in this conference to say, well, tell us something that we will still be talking about in 10 years' time. And so my contribution to this competition is the following: the Copernican revolution in management. This is not just news. We had Shakespeare and Dickens yesterday. Well, here's Percy Shelley telling us this is news that stays news. The Copernican revolution, I believe, is something we'll still be talking about in 10 years' time. So we're going to hear from some of the members of the consortium. We have on the stage, we have Riot Games, we have Ericsson, and we have Menlo Innovation, so we have a couple of others in the audience, and we'll hear from them. And we're going to hear first from Ahmed Sidky, who's going to talk about the whole incredible scene at Riot Games, as well as his impressions on the visit to Microsoft that he was involved in.
Thank you, Steve. How's everyone doing? Good? All right. So I want to tell you a bit about Riot Games. There's 2,200 of us around the world. We call ourselves Rioters. And we're spread around 15 different offices. And who in the room has heard of Riot Games? All right, a couple of people, great. We publish a game called League of Legends. So technically, right now, we're Riot Game. But we're getting to games. League of Legends is basically, if anyone here play League of Legends? 2 people. Yeah, you're not our target audience. That's why, pretty much. So I'm not surprised at all. But to understand League of Legends, we call it a MOBA. It's a multiplayer online battle arena. So basically, think of this: you have 5 people against 5 people, and there's a battle arena, and you have your home base, and you need to basically attack the other people's base while protecting your home base. Make sense? You may have heard of basketball. Yes? Okay. So basketball is the same idea, right? You have 5 against 5, and the battle arena is the court. But to imagine sort of the strategy and gameplay behind League of Legends, think of basketball online with 3 balls in the court. That's sort of the feeling that we're talking about here. So this is the largest online game in the world. We have 67 million plus monthly active players, 27 million daily players, and at peak time we have 7.5 million concurrent players. This is the largest online game in the world, and it's still growing. Now, the reason I said probably you don't know about Riot Games or the game is we are a company that is built around our core audience. Similar to what Steve was talking about, the customer is sort of the center of the universe. This is our philosophy. We build everything to serve our audience, and our audience are core gamers. So you can wake up any rioter in the middle of the night and ask them about our mission statement, and they'll tell you, we aspire to be the most player-focused game company in the world, sir. They will answer it. They will, this is in the DNA of every rioter. And we live this every day. And as you can imagine, if you want to be the most player-focused, customer-centric game company in the world, you got to do stuff like develop games, right? So we do a lot of game development. We have a large number of engineers and designers and artists doing game development. Now, you may ask, why do you have only one game? Because we're actually not in the business of just producing games. We're in the business of delighting our audience. And so with League of Legends, you actually have 120 champions that you can pick when you start playing the game. And what we noticed is people actually started having affiliation with a large number of these champions. So one of the areas we sort of diversed into was building cinematics, like this. As you can see, this isn't game development, but it's something that we do for our players. We also got into music. Again, game company, what got you into music? We've published 2 albums. They were top sellers on iTunes. And again, we're not a music company. We're not a cinematics company or a game company. But when you focus on your customer and you listen to what the customer wants, what the player wants, you start to diverse into different things. We also started listening to our customers carefully, and we found out that the latency in the network wasn't to their satisfaction. So players had different playing experience depending on the network, so we decided to build our own network. And we have built our own network in the US, and we're extending it in Europe. We have our own cables to connect players to our servers to do one thing, to delight the customer, to delight the player, to reduce their latency and give them a better gaming experience. I'll let you watch this and then we'll talk.
What a sight!
What is this? Yes. Esports. We also built a sport because we found that people didn't like only to play the game, but they love to watch the game, right? You love to watch soccer, football, basketball, and you can play it sometimes, but you also love to watch it. Same thing. We found that there are millions, hundreds of millions of people that love to watch the game just like they love to play the game. And so the clip that you saw here was from the 2014 World Finals. And by the way, there's more spectators at the World Finals. This was done in the same stadium as the FIFA World Finals in Korea. 60,000 spectators, sold out in 3 minutes. By the way, esports is the largest growing sport in the world today. So we were talking about technology and grasp that for a moment. And again, we didn't do this because we're in the business of organizing sports. We did this to delight our players. So the point being, we do a very different, diverse set of work for one reason, to delight our player. Now, try to think about all these different types of work, from game development to organizing finals like the World Cup, to music, composing music, cinematics, running networks. This is very diverse, and there's no one way of working that satisfies all these different types of work. There is no process, procedure. There's no manager that can say, here's how you work at Riot Games. What are you talking about? Which part of Riot Games? And so the only way we work is through autonomous, empowered, and aligned teams. That's how we work. We have teams, cross-functional teams, that self-organize around initiatives, around market opportunities, around player opportunities, and they are aligned. Now, when we say aligned is a big word, and we talk about aligned a lot. And I've heard it in the forum so many times. And we have a little model that we use to talk about an aligned culture. Now, when you think of culture, we think of it this way. Culture is the sum total of leadership, structure, strategy, process, tools, and people. And when we say leadership, it's all about leadership. The values, the beliefs, the style of leadership. When we talk about people, we're talking about the beliefs and habits and behaviors of people. Strategy, all of these form culture. So culture is like this rubber band, if you may, right, that surrounds this shape. And don't look at the pyramid and say, oh, there's a hierarchy. It's a triangle. It's a geometric shape that illustrates the point, but it's not about hierarchy at all, right? Actually, I just said we have autonomous teams, so we don't have this hierarchy. We're a quite flat organization. But here's what I want you to think about: misaligned cultures. When technology comes in and tries to change one part of the culture, like process, like tools, what you have actually is a misaligned culture. You have a strained culture. You have people that resist the change. Why? Because they're not aligned. And so one thing I'll give you to think about after this session is on this scale of agility, right, of flexibility, organizational agility, where are you? Where's your organization? Where's your leadership? Where are your people? Where are your strategies, structures, and processes? And if they're not aligned, of course you're going to have resistance. Of course you're going to have issues trying to adopt these technologies and practices. Why? Because there's misalignment. Now, when we look at this triangle, there's two elements in the triangle that we're most focused on at Riot, which are the human-centric ones, which is the leadership and the people. And we believe if we heavily invest in aligning people, leadership and people, the rest will come naturally. The strategy, structure, and process can evolve and should evolve and will be different from one part of the organization to the other. But what we have to align on as an organization is how people think, from leadership to the most junior developer or artist. And I've heard in the forum a lot of talk about mindset. So we've actually changed our slides from yesterday to today. And I wanted to show you the slides that we actually use at our Riot trainings to talk about mindset. This is how we teach every Rioter in the company when we say mindset, what do we actually mean? We lean on the work of Carol Dweck, and in her books, right, she basically has identified that people have one of two mindsets. A growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And let me demonstrate this very quickly. If you ask me, Ahmed, can you sing? And I say, I have a horrible voice. I have actually just exhibited a fixed mindset towards my ability to sing. I basically am saying that I believe that my ability to sing is inherent and static. Whatever I was given at birth, I can't change it. So I'm not going to try. Now, if you ask me, Ahmed, can you sing? And I say, listen, I've never taken singing lessons. I'm sure if you coach me, I'll get better. I've actually just exhibited a growth mindset towards my ability to sing. Because basically I'm saying that my ability to sing can be continuously developed. My true potential is unknown and unknowable. The more effort you put to grow and learn, the more you'll get results. Now, the behaviors that come from this are actually really important, and that's what we really care about at Riot. Because if you believe that your intelligence, ability, capability, whatever it is fixed, well, guess what? All you want to do is demonstrate that ability. That's it. You don't have a desire to develop it because, remember, you don't believe that you can develop it. And so the behaviors that come from that is that you stick to what you know. You've succeeded once, you stick to it, you do it again and again and again because you know how it works. You avoid failure, you avoid uncertainty. By the way, you don't like feedback. Why? Because whatever feedback I get from you, I can't change it anyway, so I'm going to resist it. And now it becomes a personal attack. Now, the growth mindset is very different. The growth mindset has this continuous desire to learn and develop. And so they actually look for uncertainty, they look for learning, they look for feedback. They're not afraid to put effort and time into learning new stuff. Now, this is about singing and intellectual ability and all that. The way we translate this to the world of work is this: uncertainty. VUCA, super VUCA, whatever you want to call it, right? But all this uncertainty, the fixed mindset, when faced with uncertainty, will try to force things to a known state. Because once I force it back to a known state and fix it there, I know how to deal with it. But the growth mindset, or the Riot mindset, or the Agile mindset, whatever you want to call it, when faced with uncertainty, have this desire to learn quickly from their customer, get feedback, inspect, and adapt. That's very, very different. Now, I went on the visit with the Learning Consortium to Microsoft. And as Steve said, we met a gentleman named Aaron there, who is a product manager. And I want to tell you the warship picture into the speedboats, that doesn't happen in a large organization because one team tried Agile and loved it. It doesn't work that way. It works that something was happening at the top level. So I asked him, like, where did this all start from at Microsoft? And he said, my boss. And so I'm going to read you a quote from him. Brian Harry, who's his boss, is a move forward guy. And then Aaron says, there are two types of leaders that I've seen in my life. One type has had success in the past and is always trying to repeat the success the same way. The second type of leader is what I'm calling a move forward leader. They recognize that things are always moving forward. Technology is moving forward, customers are moving forward, the world is moving forward, and they try to move forward to keep up with all that by constantly learning, and they're not afraid to try new risky things. Now, Aaron and I had never met before. I guarantee you, Aaron never saw our internal training slide. Actually, I asked Aaron, do you know the work of Carol Dweck? And he said, no. Who is she? But look at the convergence of thought. When you think about the move forward leader that Aaron was talking about, are they fixed mindset or this agile mindset we're talking about? They're the agile mindset. The fixed mindset leader says, yes, we know how to do things in the past, and we're going to stick to that. And we're going to try, by the way, to stick everything to that. And this is how corporations should be. And this is X, Y, and Z, and that's it. And I think what we're seeing, and just to comment on my experience at the forum so far, I think we've heard a lot about the mindset and millennials. And I agree with the last panel. We shouldn't call them millennials. Because I know people that were with us in the Learning Consortium that are not millennials, but have this growth mindset. So it's about your mindset, not about your age or generation. And to summarize, as Steve was talking about in the results, and again, this is all in the handout that you have, we saw that strong leadership and the mindset is what made these organizations change. And strong leadership doesn't mean you shall have a new mindset in 3 months. You can't decree that. You can't audit it, right? And you can't put a compliance committee around it. You have to live it. You have to inspire people. They have to see you modeling the desired behavior. And on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Paul, who's head of product development at Ericsson, and he'll tell you his experiences.
Thanks, Ahmed. That was great from Riot, actually. I didn't really want to go on after Riot, but I did the short straw. I'm Paul Madden from Ericsson, and just briefly to give a little bit about what we do in Ericsson. So, like Ahmed talked there quite a bit, and we had some feedback earlier that maybe that's okay for you because it's a small new company. So, what we have in Ericsson is about 120,000 people. We have sales of about 25 billion euros, and we've been around for about 125 years. So we've been around for a while. And we've been at the leading edge of technological advancements in telecoms for those 125 years. And it's a fairly cutthroat business. If I go back 10 years ago and look at who Ericsson's competitors were, they were Nokia, they were Siemens, Alcatel, Lucent, Nortel, and Ericsson made up the top 6 in that segment. 4 of those companies have collapsed into one company today to survive. They weren't able to make it on their own. The 5th company went bankrupt and we acquired them after. And we've seen new entrants into the market. So for us, this market is quite cutthroat and it is very much change, adapt, or die. So what do we do in Ericsson? One thing we don't do is make handsets. We used to make mobile phones, we were really bad at it, so we stopped making mobile phones. But we do build the networks that connect mobile phones. 40% of the world's mobile traffic is switched through Ericsson networks. Networks we've sold to operators like AT&T, like T-Mobile, like Telstra, SoftBank, literally every operator in the world. And our equipment then switches 40% of that traffic around the world. And those networks are incredibly complex. If an operator rolls out a network in a country, they have to roll out base stations covering that whole country. So you're allowed to drive around that country and have a mobile signal all the time, all the way. So they may have thousands or tens of thousands of base stations. The base station is what your mobile phone connects to via the radio signal, rolled across the country. And if one of those goes down, then you have no mobile coverage in that area. And that is the biggest thing that will cause operators to lose customers. If people don't get a good signal, or their phone calls are dropping, they switch provider. So it's hugely important for these operators that have invested billions in these networks that the networks stay up and running. And I'm from a unit in Ericsson in Athlone. It's right in the middle of Ireland. It's a small town of about 30,000 people. We have probably is the biggest and most advanced software development house in Ireland, which is a pretty good claim because 9 of the top 10 IT companies in the world have serious operations in Ireland. We're fairly holding our own on the IT sector. And what we do there is we build a management system. We build a large enterprise system that sits on top of the network that the operators use to maintain their networks. So they use this to monitor these thousands of base stations across the country. If there's any faults anywhere, that we fix it. And our system literally has to respond to millions of events per second, look at them, correlate them, analyze them, and trigger responses and changes in the network. And these networks are like living creatures. You can't really predict the behavior. There's so many moving parts, it's impossible to model it. So it is like a living thing. And our system then that sits on top to make life easier and possible for the operators is it has to be a very complex system. And we have two systems. We have a legacy system, which is still covering our entire install base. We have about 60 Agile teams working on that today. And we have a new system, our next gen, where we have 110 teams working on that. So that's 110 teams building one large enterprise product that will roll out across the world, and in a couple of years' time, every operator in the world will be using this product. And each of those teams is a team of 8 or 9 engineers. And if I look back at how we would have worked 6 or 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, we had a very detailed process. Our engineers came into work, they followed the manual from morning to evening. What do I do now? And they followed the manual. Very detailed process. We didn't give them any latitude to think for themselves. We didn't give them any autonomy. They just did exactly what the process said. So we were paying money to recruit engineers, knowledge workers, creative economy workers, and then we were telling them, come out and work with us, but don't think while you're at work with us. And that's what we moved away from. And we've moved now to where we have our teams, we give them as much as autonomy as we possibly can. Let them decide how to do stuff. Let them decide what's the best way to go. And with that, we are encouraging people to think all the time, and that's where you see the innovation, where people have got that freedom to think, and that freedom to act, more importantly. And I suppose the main point, back to the findings from the consortium, is that we're doing it with a very large-scale enterprise, very complex product, and we're doing it at large scale. Those 110 teams are in Ireland, Poland, Italy, India. And one of the biggest challenges we've had over the last couple of years with this way of working, where we're trying and have those empowered autonomous teams, is to get the balance right between autonomy and alignment. With 110 teams, you have to have alignment. You have to make sure that we're running in the same direction. Because if we're not, we have chaos. So there has to be some efforts to make sure we have alignment in place. But too much alignment, and you choke the whole productivity with bureaucracy. And that brings us back to where we were 7 years ago. And looking back at where we were 7 years ago, it's such a dark-looking place from where we are today. And I know that if we went to go back to that type of way of working, all our people would leave. To go back is not an option. It's very similar to the Microsoft story. And in one area where we've done this really well, I think, it's just one example. With large companies, there's always going to be different units doing the same thing at the same time, and they don't work together. And sometimes it's because they don't know about what's going on in the other units, but sometimes it's because they don't want to get tied into their deadlines. And we've done an inner source program where we've taken the practices of open source development and applied them within the company. We set up a common framework, a common set of rules, and a common architecture. And we tell units, if you adhere to these rules, these guidelines, you have a list of assets here that you can take off a shelf that you can use. And then what you build, if you follow this, you put what you build on the shelf and it's available to other units. And someone else may take it, enhance it, and put it back on the shelf. So we're still giving the autonomy to the units. They can decide to do this or not. But if they do it, they get the benefits. But they see the benefit themselves, and this is working really well for us. Then just a little bit onto the visits, because I participated on most. I didn't get the West Coast visits, but I participated on most of the site visits. And just some of the things that I saw that really resonated with me, and I suppose were captured by Steve at the start. And one of the things that's very clear to me is that we do a lot of research about good management practices. What are good management practices? But when we're challenged with putting them into reality and using them ourselves, that's where we often fall down. And Peter Drucker himself said we should treat our employees like volunteers. So if you do treat your employees like volunteers, because you have them so well motivated, they're passionate about their job, would you be prepared to say Thursdays are optional? When the alarm clock goes in the morning, you can knock off the alarm clock and have a duvet day. If you come into work, that's great. If you don't come into work, we'll pay you anyway. But we're confident because our people are so passionate about their job, they'll come into work. Or maybe not. Maybe that's a bit too far. But I do think it's those management practices that we have to be clear about. What have they given us at the result? Daniel Pinkman talks about the Sawyer effect. And whether our management practices, do they take work and turn it into play, or do they take play and turn it into work? Because in the creative economy, we need people to engage their brains. We need people to be engaged in their job and passionate about it. So we have to make sure our management practices take the work and turn it into play. And one of the examples that struck me was when we visited C.H. Robinson in Minneapolis. And it's a fantastic company in the freight business, but don't own any lorries. And on this change, they're on their own transformation, the same as all of us. And one of the things that we've said is very important with these transformations is leadership, true leadership. And one of the things that struck me when I walked in the door of C.H. Robinson is you walk in, you're in an open plan office, a large open plan, like there's about 600 people in that building. You have all the engineers, you have all the directors of technology and directors of R&D in there, and you have the CIO of the company sitting out in the open plan desk in the middle of all the engineers. And that's a real, tangible, visible message to the staff in Robinson that we're on this transformation, but the leadership, we're going to walk that journey together. We're all going to walk that together. And for me, that was really good. And I think a great question would be, how many CIOs of Fortune 500s actually sit in the open plan with their engineers, and how many sit up in the corner office? And another one was, we visited Menlo in Ann Arbor, and one thing we've seen a lot of research on as well in the creative economy is if someone works 40 hours a week for you every week, you will get more out of that person than if they work 50 hours a week for you every week. That can be counterintuitive to some people, but you need people to come into work with their brain switched on, and you need them to engage. Sitting in front of a blue screen doing nothing is useless to you. So fundamentally, there's a lot of research that says if you keep them in the office for 40 hours and 40 hours only, you get more value for you and your company. And in Menlo, when we walked around Menlo and we talked to many of the engineers, they work 40-hour weeks and no more. Nobody works on a Saturday, nobody works on a Sunday. There's nobody in there at midnight trying to get that thing done. They do the 40-hour week. And that's great for Menlo because they're getting more value out of their people, and it's great for the people because they're getting a good work-life balance. And it's a principle in Menlo that's really respected. And on that point, I'll hand over to Rich, who can tell you a little bit more about the Menlo story.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So I've been on a journey just this week, going around Europe. I was spending a lot of time in Germany, just happened to be in the neighborhood, so I thought I'd come in and spend some time with all of you, and it's an absolute honor to be here. My personal journey is one of disillusionment. I wanted out of this industry because I was experiencing sort of the opposite of what you are talking about at this conference and what you aspire to at this conference. And quite frankly, my journey out led me to authors and books. And I tell the world the books that had greatly influenced me, and the first book I ever read was Peter Drucker's book on management. And the lesson I took away from that very thick tome, probably one of the longest books I read in my life up to that point, was that management requires a flexible workforce. And as I think about, Ahmed, what you talked about, we could probably translate that today to management needs a flexible mindset. in order to get to that flexible workforce. At my company, Menlo Innovations, we pursue a mission to end human suffering in the world as it relates to technology. In this context, we pursue the business value of joy. I wrote a book called Joy, Inc. It's amazing how many people want to hear about joy in the world these days. And for us, that actually translates directly into how we serve the people who will use the software that we actually touch. We want to delight those people with the work of our hearts, our hands, and our minds. That's our core mission at Menlo. So that focus of the company is not internal, it's external. We're looking at what we do as a service organization. We look to the people whom we serve. In order to overcome the near constant tragedy that is poorly executed software efforts across the entire software industry, you barely can pick up a Wall Street Journal these days without the front page indicating some massive software project failure somewhere in the world. We knew at our company that we would need a new culture in order to overcome these challenges. So the central theme for us is driving out fear. What could we do if we weren't afraid? Well, we could tear down the walls and work together in a noisy, energized environment. We have few rules at Menlo, but one of the strongest is that we ban earbuds while working because we want people to overhear each other. We believe in the serendipity of people overhearing the ideas of others as a springboard for creativity and imagination. We could embrace that noise and lead to the kind of learning that isn't just fostered by books, but actually by the way we work. You see, we connect our team, we connect them intellectually, we connect them emotionally, we connect them physically. In our world at Menlo, two people work together all day long on the same task at the same time. The pairs are assigned, and we switch them every 5 working days. The human energy that results from this kind of organization is palpable. You can actually feel the joy of the team when you're in the room. We have very few meetings at Menlo. We hate meetings. We think they're mind-numbing, spirit-sucking, energy-draining devices of management. You can ask me later what I really think. Even Peter Drucker seems to agree with me. He said meetings are by definition a concession to a deficient organization, for one either meets or one works. Now, we do have one team stand-up meeting every morning, and everyone comes, passing around a plastic Viking helmet, which has become the iconic symbol of Menlo. The reason we like the plastic Viking helmet, though, is it's very practical. It has the practical value of, because we work in pairs, we report out in pairs, and it's a talking stick for our meeting. So we pass it around the meeting, 2 at a time. Everybody reports out, and there will always be more than 50 people. Sometimes there's 60, 70, or 80 people in this stand-up meeting, and almost every morning it takes 13 minutes. I defy most organizations to begin a meeting of 60 people in 13 minutes, let alone call it, start it, hold it, give everyone a chance to report out, and they do, and then get back to work. We also knew we had to change the conversations with our customers. You see, one of the challenges in the technical world is a tribal challenge between different tribes that have to learn to communicate with one another. We look at the world of technology as business tribes and technical tribes, and quite frankly, a lost tribe. The lost tribe of technology is often the users. We have a whole industry that has learned to call the people they serve stupid over almost its entire history. We sometimes get you to self-deprecate. You know, oh, you know me, I'm just a stupid user. And then rewrite dummies books for you poor people. We didn't think it had to be that way. We thought a weekly check-in, every 5-day check-in with our clients. You see, what we do for a living is we design and build custom software. So the people who are sponsoring the work that happens in this room that you're seeing pictures of is work that is paid for by the people who are engaging us to design and build custom software for them. But we changed the role, the typical role in this show and tell event, where we put our customer front and center. We put them at the keyboard and the mouse, and we have them show us the work we did the previous 5 days, while the team that did the work attends and watches the customer touch the work that they've done in just the last 5 days. We wanted to disintermediate the discussion about how did this project go this week. We wanted to have everyone present so they could see directly how our customers are responding to the work. We use simple paper-based planning tools. I always like to do this with a crowd. I bet even back in the back of the room you can hear me doing this, rubbing the paper here, because we are very visual, tactile creatures, and so when we plan with little folded pieces of paper. Some people refer to us as the Amish of software development because we use paper-based planning tools. But our rule is simple. We choose tools we believe work better for humans, and paper-based tools are just much more human. And we aren't afraid to run experiments. We have a culture of experimentation. One of the most common phrases at Menlo is, let's run the experiment. One of our most famous experiments was when one of the Menlo staff had a baby and didn't have childcare options that were viable. And when she came back after 3 months of maternity leave, we said, bring her in. She brought her in all day, every day for several months. It was a grand experiment at Menlo, and we are now up to Menlo baby number 13 in the last 8 years. So these are different ways to run companies that embrace the team and so on. And there's no question that inside of all of this fun working environment, open and collaborative spaces, clever spaces, energizing spaces, there can be no substitute, especially in our industry, for rigor and discipline. You might look at a company like Riot Games and say, but it's just a game. But it's not. It's a business. It has to run every day. Their users are counting on their software working just like ours are. And so all of these things are very important. We want our cell phones to work. We want our software to work. We want our games to work. We want every piece of our lives to work. We want the software working in airplanes to work. So there's no question that rigor and discipline is a huge part of what we have to do every day. For us, we encapsulated this in a simple phrase, the business value of joy, and we define that joy by seeing the work of our hearts, our hands, and our minds be delivered to the world and delight the people for whom it's intended. I don't know if did you guys give me a bumper slide here? No, I'm going to go back just a couple, because I want to offer up my insights of all the site visits I did. Been to C.H. Robinson, I've been to Riot Games and Microsoft and Solutions IQ and Agile 42. And quite frankly, because of the book I've written, I get to a whole lot of other companies. I would encourage you, if you have the chance, to go out and see things, because it's amazing what's happening out there in the world. As I reflect on the visits and the specifics of each journey that I've witnessed of the leaders inside of these companies, patterns emerge. The transformation of the human organizations at each company was typically years in the making. So if people are looking for simple, fast change, they're probably not going to find it. For those that are not years in the making, perhaps some earlier in their journey, there was strong evidence of progress while overall maturity was still developing. There's evidence sometimes in those cases of old culture and new culture still bumping into one another. The more experienced of us in the consortium recognize those patterns from our own journeys. Each leader has their own very passionate and personal story as to how and why they even attempted this journey in the first place, because this is a journey that often involved personal, professional risk. There were always business reasons present in any of our individual decisions as to why we were going to do this big change inside the companies we worked for. But it went much deeper to that more uniquely personal place for each leader. There was a sense of an awakening followed by a calling and then a persistent, passionate pursuit against all odds. Some of those journeys seemed to take on a version of a Joseph Campbell hero's journey. There was a personal, professional risk in those individual transformation as the emergent leaders' changing mindset no longer fit the accepted norm within their organization. There were attempts with setbacks. There was at times discouragement, but never defeat. These were the kind of stories we heard from each leader we visited. As they described both their personal and corporate journey, the words culture, autonomy, alignment, belief, structure, engagement, values, positive energy, safety, trust, and joy would invariably work their way into the stories. What was clear that ultimately a strong shared belief system was established, and the greatest of efficiencies would come from this, as now decisions could be made and executed at the lowest levels where work was actually being done. You could see this at work in each company we visited. Managerial bottlenecks seemed to no longer exist or were so nascent as to be anomalies. This was true even in large organizations like Microsoft and Riot Games. You sensed the trust that existed between worker and manager. There was universally less need for hierarchy in the mature organizations, and we anticipate this will be true in the others as they progress. Strength in the journey was derived from high-level sponsors. Each transformational leader, those change agents, was emboldened by a supportive executive from above who gave them the latitude and the confidence to execute a plan. This required executive patience, as early experiments were naturally unsuccessful and then adapted based on learning. Patience was needed. Zealotry for a defined approach was not apparent in this group. Each organization learned from experts, coaches, authors, published methodologies, but each also adapted, modified, experimented, combined, and invented their own unique approach. The core values of trust, safety, collaboration, teamwork, autonomy, and alignment were always evident. The value system underpinned the practices that all followed. In their own way, an iterative and incremental practice was there, with quick feedback loops, rigor, discipline, structure, and an experimental mindset that was not paralyzed by fear of making small mistakes. This experimental system led each to building a learning organization. I would guess that it would be no coincidence that these same companies would take a chance on joining the experiment of the Scrum Alliance Learning Consortium, because taking time away from our days and joining this kind of learning consortium was a risk for us as well. Each in our own way never lost sight of the business goals behind the purpose-driven cultures we were building. The opportunity for closer contact with customers and users, fast turnaround time of desired features, a quality focus so as not to disrupt the relationship with users and customers, and how all this fed into a delightful energy of each team member who could feel the purpose being played out in actual work product result. John Naisbitt, in his book Megatrends, virtually predicted the depth and importance of today's conversation at this forum in 1982 when he said the most exciting breakthroughs that will occur in the 21st century, remember he wrote this 30 years ago, the most exciting breakthroughs that will occur in the 21st century will not occur because of technology, but because of an expanding concept of what it means to be human. That's what I see us talking about for these days. Everyone you see here in this panel would agree that we are not chasing technology, but rather an engaging way to build very human organizations. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. And we're going to have questions. Let me just ask one question to one of our members. C.H. Robinson, we have the Chief Information Officer here. When I worked in a big organization, the information department was in the basement, and the Chief Financial Officer was on the 14th floor. Chad is someone who is just transferred from being Chief Financial Officer for 15 years to being Chief Information Officer. So I think this sheds some light on the role of technology in the new organization. Chad, will you like to just say a word on that?
Sure. As Steve mentioned, I've spent most of my career in finance. I've spent my whole career at C.H. Robinson, 25 years, 15 years of that as the CFO. When I joined the company, our IT department was less than 20 people. It is over 600 today. This whole theme of people or technology, our company would be dead if we got rid of either. Our mission statement starts out with our people, process, and technology. It is people first. It will always be people first. So why did I make the crazy change? It's very unusual. I'm not aware of any other Fortune 500 publicly held company CFO moving to CIO. Frankly, because it's far more important. Our industry, technology is required to move our customers' freight. I'm sorry I didn't introduce what C.H. Robinson does. We're a $13.5 billion logistics company with 13,000 employees spread across the globe. Our technology is all built in-house, and it is what enables us to meet the needs and delight our customers. When I started in the department was 25 people. It was all back office accounting. Because of that, I've always been deeply involved in the IT department, so the move is not maybe quite as radical as it sounds. Thank you. Oh, and the Learning Consortium, I should mention this too. So, some people say they have a aha moment. I had a oh shit moment. I went in there and said, I know the company as well as anybody. I know I can make the IT department better. Then when I was there, I started making it better. I knew what Agile was. I've learned an incredible amount from that small young company up there, from that big telecom company, and from Rich's company. So thank you, Steve, for running your experiment.
Thanks, Chad. And, I'd also like to hear from Thomas Julie, who is represented Magna International, huge manufacturing company, $37 billion, 128,000 employees. We had a site visit to Barcelona. So this is not just about software. It's not just about computers or technology. It's also about traditional organizations. Thomas?
Well, absolutely. Well, I had an aha moment visiting Ericsson. And I had one question in my mind when I went to Athlone. How do you create the space for innovation? And they showed a slide, and actually the way to create the space or the environment for innovation is that you do not plan a full utilization of your employees. But what they found out, if you go for 70% utilization, that's when they got the most benefit out of it. And I thought, that's pretty cool. So this doesn't mean that 30% of their time they're just drinking coffee. You know, there are times when they actually have to work overtime. It's basically expect the unexpected. Especially when you work innovation, you cannot plan every single step. So you create the space right in front, and that actually created the environment for innovation. And then there was something else. I mean, they had a long evolution of innovation. And I thought, where do you start? I mean, there are so many things you can do with Riot games, what we learned, etc. And they stress the importance of fast improvements, small improvements. Because if you do small improvements, you get quick benefits. And you do not need your own budget. As a matter of fact, if you have an improvement budget, sometimes it seems to be an impediment. Whereas when you go for fast, quick improvements, everybody can do. Bottom up, top down. You get the benefits right away, and you get the immediate feedback. So those were the two aha moments I learned at Ericsson. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Let's take some questions, and we have, yeah.
I'm just thinking back to Manny's speech last night.
Right.
I just want to draw a little parallel for some of the people in the room, I think, might be thinking this. You know, we were hearing about how this sort of movement is going to sort of change the way organizations are working. Organizations are working rather than necessarily software development. I mean, you know, we come from the software industry, we understand this, why this works like this. But let me give you a use case scenario. The bank that I just found myself, you know, working with over the summer. You know, here we have, you know, put it bluntly, prima donna asshole bastards in charge of functions who are almost refusing to give up control. Collectively, put them in a room and they'll say, oh yeah, I can go there, I can do that. But actually, there's a lot of passive-aggressive behavior. How do you sort of unlock that organizational change. And maybe, you know, that's the sort of experience that you guys have had more in the business end. That would be really interesting to hear how you did that from an engagement point of view.
Well, every one of these organizations has a story, and some of the stories are in the report, and I certainly suggest you read the report, but also go on site visits, that this is a way to actually learn that the future is already here, and that we don't need to invent it. It's actually happening right in front of us, and learn how the different organizations, the journey doesn't happen instantaneously. That is a key finding.
Just probably one comment on that, on the bank story, was that talking to, say, other colleagues that work in the banking sector, and I only talk now for their IT departments, that they see in bank-type companies, they have a lot more freedom to act in a bank than they have in a technology company. Because if I look at Ericsson, the guys pulling the purse strings on top are engineers. They know too much about what's going on, and they want the detail and they want to understand exactly. Whereas in a bank, the guy in charge is going to be, just fix it for me, I don't care what you do, I don't understand it. And their experience is they've had more freedom to act in those types of environments, but it is only for the IT sector within the banking industry.
But the commercial pressures are overriding. Change or die is more and more a reality for organizations. So it's not an option. It's only a question of when it's going to happen, not whether. Another question? Yeah? Oh, yeah.
We do a survey every 2 years, State of Scrum. So to your question, how do we change? We cannot change any one person. Really, the environment is driving that inspiration for change. Even though, yes, the Agile ideology started in the IT software development side of the house, it's expanding. About 52% of our 5,000 people answering the survey in 140 countries are still in the IT, but that's only half. The other half is starting to use Agile ideologies and frameworks like Scrum beyond the IT department, in marketing, in operations, in industries that you would never imagine that they could change. Government. 16% of the respondents were from government. Government doesn't change. 6% in education. In the US, we've been trying to change education for the last 35 years. And it's impossible. Well, not so much. It's starting to change. We have a high school I visited in Phoenix utilizing Scrum to teach. In Brazil, I visited 12 corporations, including a school, also a high school, utilizing Scrum to teach. So this is a movement that is going beyond anyone trying to change anything. All bureaucrats are looking at this change, and they know that either they change or they die, like everybody said up there. But
thanks, Manny. I'm afraid our time has expired, and thank you for joining us. If you have a question you would like answered, you can certainly send it to us on this email link, or send it to me directly, and I will arrange to have it answered in writing. And but our strong appeal is not to send emails, but to go and visit. Go and see with your own eyes, interact. Even within your own organization, you will probably find examples like this. And the future is already here. Just go and see it. Thank you very much.